All right. Hi, everyone. Let's go again. I was doing an audio live just a moment ago, but I couldn't really tell if you could hear it or not. So I'm just here to give you an update this evening on the latest as it pertains to the Commission of Inquiry into the Paria incident, into the Paria Fuel Trading Company incident, which took the lives of the divers. Um, so as you would know, there has been yet another extension. The chairman of the Commission of Inquiry, Jeremy Lynch, KC, on the 28th of August would have applied for an extension to the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago by a public request. On the 30th of August, this request was responded to by Her Excellency Christine Kangaloo, ORTT, President of the Republic, and she gave an extension from August 30th, 2023 to November 30th, 2023. As you could imagine, this was not the families of the divers who, um, you know, lost their loved ones were not very happy with this extension because they felt that the Commission of Inquiry was now doing something which was rather very disrespectful to the families. And they felt that this this was unbecoming of the commission so to do. In fact, what I will do is I will play a little bit of the press conference of the 23rd of September, of the 6th of September, where the chairman highlight the comments from the families that he would have received. Now, I realize that you weren't hearing the audio, so I'm going to try and add the audio now. Give me a second, please. Folks, if you're not hearing, you can let me know in the comments so that I'm not wasting time, all right? So give me a second. Let me do this for you guys who have been waiting assiduously for an update on this particular matter. So hold tight. And thank you as usual for tuning in. One moment.
Well, good morning, everybody. On the 28th of August of this year, I applied to the President for an extension to the deadline for producing the report and made that application public. On the 30th of August of this year, some of the family members of Yusuf Henry, Rishi Nagasar, and Faisal Kurban, together with Christopher Boudram, and no doubt keenly felt by Kazim Ali Jr.'s family, issued a statement which in part said the following, and I've edited out the more emotive language aimed at the company Paria. They said this: "The darkness still exists, even after more than a year. Our families struggle to deal with the murder of our loved ones, the permanent disruption of our livelihoods, the flashbacks, sleepless nights, and haunting images of what happened or may have happened. In that pipeline, as a result of the actions of the management of Paria Fuel Trading Company Limited. It is therefore an angering, irksome, unwelcome, insulting and unjust development for the Commission of Inquiry to request a further extension for the submission of the report. The commissioners, staff and other involved agencies would have been well aware of their initial deadline of August the 31st and should have been working in such fashion to ensure the meeting of this deadline. The undertaking of responsibilities associated with this commission report cannot be seen as simply a job, but rather viewed as a critical component in the delivery of justice. Whilst we do not accept that their criticism is an entirely fair one, we can and do understand their deep sense of frustration at this further delay. And I therefore want to apologize to them first and foremost. That apology is extended to everyone awaiting the final outcome of this report. It is clear from the families and others that they have already formed the view that they hold Paria responsible. We do not have the luxury of prejudging. We must approach this in an unbiased, objective way, examining all of the evidence before reaching our view of the facts and what that means for the people involved. Whilst we have a very considerable degree of flexibility in how we approach that task, we are bound by the law. The procedure for our Commission of Inquiry is derived from the Commission of Inquiry Act of 1892. Our procedural rules, as gazetted on the 22nd of July of 2022, and the common law rules of natural justice. The touchstone, really, is fairness. It is exactly a year and a day since I opened this Commission of Inquiry, and you will recall that I told everyone we hope to have the report ready by Easter of 2023. That was ambitious, but I believed then that it was achievable. At that time, I did not know that we would have 78 witnesses generating around 3,300 pages of detailed evidence and about 30,500 pages of exhibits. I leave aside videos, audios, pictures, transcripts, letters, and other correspondence. In truth, at the time, I knew little of the material we would have to work through, but I was and remained optimistic of an expeditious timetable in the interests of those most affected by this tragedy, and was not prepared to brook delay. In drafting the report, it became clear that this would take longer than planned, and I made an application to the President to extend the time needed on the 4th of May to the date at the end of August of 2023. On the 9th of June of this year, the Court of Appeal in Trinidad handed down a judgment in what I shall call for shorthand the Las Ultras housing matter. Unusually, they issued guidelines that went well beyond the judgment needed to determine the case. They set out how a Commission of Inquiry should conduct themselves so as to achieve procedural fairness, acting prudently to ensure that all parties had every opportunity to make their case and deal with any criticisms that may arise. We have been much assisted by that judgment. We have determined that the procedural fairness we have strived to achieve from the outset can properly be augmented by taking into account the learning from the Court of Appeal. That we will do, albeit it will generate some further delay, as they themselves recognized. At this stage of the inquiry, the proceedings have to be in private. You know that we have sought to be as open as good practice, good conscience, and the law permit by placing all correspondence and every document on the website, live streaming the evidence called, and then making transcripts of the evidence available to everyone. But after that, And prior to the report being concluded, it has to be in private. And that's where we are now. This is how it works. We draft a preliminary report that is detailed and analytical work. It necessarily involves making a number of preliminary findings. It is currently in the 200-page range. That has been done. Where those findings may adversely affect any particular party, be it company or individual, we must identify the issue, tell them what the primary finding or preliminary finding is and upon what it is based. Whilst I cannot tell you to who or whom letters have been sent, it is not an insignificant number. That has been done. Next, we must then give them a proper opportunity to respond. That takes time, especially where the criticisms are lengthy and detailed. It would be unwise to curtail a reasonable request for time to provide those responses. We are in receipt of hundreds of pages of detailed responses, which themselves reference many other documents and the evidence. That has also been done. Now that we have received all the responses, we must collate that material, cross-reference it, and consider whether the response ought properly to affect our preliminary views. That is in the process of being done. And then finally, we have to determine that once complete, we ought to provide a further opportunity to any of those whom we may seek to criticize to make any further submissions as to why that should not happen. This also takes time. It is this additional layer of consultation that has played a part in dictating our request of the President for further time. We will provide each party, where appropriate, with a summary or an extract of the proposed report for them to respond to. We will take that into account and then decide whether or not we can sustain that criticism or whether it needs further refinement in the light of submissions made. Clearly, that has yet to be done. Before I open the floor to any questions, there are a couple of other observations I'd like to make. There's been some media speculation that the cause of the delay has been as a result of either political or company, Paria in particular, interference in some way. I can state categorically that that is not the case. If there were even a whiff of such an approach, I would make that very public indeed. After our initial hiccups with the necessary facilities, the government, and in particular the Honourable Stuart Young, MP, have done all they can to facilitate and expedite this report, and I am confident that they will wish to publish it in short order once concluded and submitted. Similarly, we place no blame at anyone else's door for this delay. The delay, such as it is mine. I have decided that we will take a little more time and add additional safeguards so as to ensure fairness to all and limit the potential for any further litigation aimed at thwarting the legitimate aims of this inquiry. But it would be remiss of us and not in keeping with the purpose of this press conference to bring you up to date, not to tell you that we have received letters from lawyers representing Kenson's employees on the 2nd of August and previously, and from lawyers representing Heritage and Paria yesterday. Both suggest they have been unfairly treated and that the commissioners, I suspect primarily me, have displayed an apparent bias and that we should be recused. I do not deal with the merits of those complaints now, as they have yet to be fully articulated, and a press conference is not the right forum for making such decisions. whilst I wholeheartedly reject those allegations, I would have thought that if there was to be an application for recusal on the grounds of apparent bias, it is normal in the first instance for that to be made before the tribunal engaged in the process. In other words, to me. As yet, no request has been made for the Commission of Inquiry to resume sitting to hear such an application, and no such application has been put before us. So that's where we are today. I am open to questions, and I see that somebody, it doesn't have his name up, it's just described as SAWIC, media mode.
But could I ask media persons to just state their name and media house before they ask any questions, just for our records?
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Good day to everyone. Good night to those of you in other parts of the world viewing at night time. I am Daniel George from Sawit Media Mode, and I'll begin with these 3 questions. Are there any pending responses? That's 1. Number 2, will
sorry, say that again. Forgive me, would you say that question again? Are there any?
Okay, pending responses, responses that you're supposed to get to look at. Number 2,
I can't hear your number 2.
Mr.
You're
George.
breaking up.
submissions result in and not.
Excuse me, sir. I'm going to stop you because I can't hear, and if I can't, I suspect nobody else can. You're breaking up a little. No, I think it's probably the connection. I didn't catch your name. I think I got the first question.
Mr. George, Daniel George.
Daniel George. Thank you, Mr. George.
Yes, and the second question, will any further submissions result in further delay of the inquiry?
Right. Well, I can answer those 2 questions. Are those your questions?
I have one more question.
All right.
The final question thus far, is it correct to say that over 5 million has been placed into the Commission of Inquiry thus far? And if yes, can you say how much more in TT dollars will be placed into the Commission, providing that this extension is granted?
Right. Well, let me deal with each of those separately, please. Are there any pending responses? We now have, I can tell you, all of the responses to our preliminary views. They are, I emphasize, preliminary views. We've submitted them to each and every person who we seek to provide some sort of critique, and we've received their responses, so that we're awaiting no further responses. Save that, once we have considered the responses we have, we will then seek to take that into account in the report. That will then in turn be summarized, and they will be sent a further statement setting out what it is that we have concluded at this stage, and giving them yet a further opportunity to seek to persuade us otherwise. So that part of it hasn't begun yet. We are still now collating, as I've explained earlier, the responses that we've had. And you'll understand that it's not really possible for us to consider each one as and when they arrive. We have to have them all before we can consider whether or not one impacts upon the other. In other words, in a situation, perhaps not in this case or in this inquiry, you might have A saying to B, well, it's not my fault, it's his fault. And until we have the response from B, we wouldn't be able to consider whether there's any merit in A's allegation. So that's the scenario we are in. We needed to receive all of the responses. We now have them. We're now collating them. We'll now consider whether or not they impact on our preliminary views about the particular individuals or companies. So that's the first question. Any further submissions? Well, I think I've covered that in the same answer. As for any further monies that are being made available to the Commission of Inquiry, I think Mr. Ramesh Maharaj has made a public statement saying that we will deal with all of the funding of the Commission of Inquiry, both in the report and make ourselves publicly available to deal with any questions arising from that at the conclusion. And so it's probably not useful for me to contribute now. Clearly, there was a cost involved, and we will deal with it at the conclusion of the or the handing of the report to the President. So thank you very much, Mr. George. Anybody else? Mr. Ramdas? Yes, sir.
Hello, good morning.
Miss Ramdas, forgive me.
Yeah, sorry, my name is Anna Ramdas. I'm the Trinidad Express newspaper. Good morning to everyone. Chairman, you mentioned that you received letters yesterday with claims of bias. How are these complaints going to be dealt with, and would it compromise the Commission's report in any way?
Well, all I can tell you is that in relation to the letter we received yesterday from lawyers representing Paria and Heritage, they made it clear in that letter that they regard our approach to the case as being one of apparent bias, and that they propose to do something about it. Well, I don't know what it is they're going to do about it, but no doubt they will lodge whatever complaint they want to or seek legal redress wherever they think it is appropriate. For the time being, we have no further detail as to what it is that they say we have done, which they are not very happy with. But that's a matter for them. I will carry on doing our job in the way in which we regard as being fair to everybody. I hope that answers your question, Ms. Ramdas. You're on mute at the moment.
Oh, yes, thank you very much.
Not at all. So, anyone else? Any questions?
Yes, good day. You all hear me?
Yes, Mr. Lalchan.
Yes, Mr. Lalchan from WAC Radio 90.1 FM. Mr. Lynch, what reassurance could you give the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago that there will be no further extension requested by you on the November 30th? What reassurance could you give us that November the 30th is going to be the date for the final report to be handed in? Or is there going to be further requests for an extension?
Not an unreasonable question, Mr. Lalchan. What I can say to you is if you'd asked me that question when I was making the application for an extension to the end of August, I would have said to you that I believe that that was genuinely achievable. And I did not anticipate that I would have to be making a second request. It grieves me that I felt it necessary to do so. As I said earlier, I'm sure that the families and those who are particularly interested in the outcome of this inquiry are frustrated by that delay. But whilst I fully anticipate that there will be no further application, I cannot put my hand on my heart and say it's impossible. Although I want to reassure you and the public at large that I am genuinely trying to do everything I possibly can to make sure that there is a report available for the President by the end of November.
Thank you.
Yes, I see Mr. Ramdas still has her hand up. I don't know if that's to ask a further question or whether it's there from before.
Yes, Chairman, just one more question. Did the Commission have to utilize any external assistance internationally, regionally, in terms of dealing with the evidence compiled in the report or received?
Well, all of the evidence that we have received is on the website. So that is to say, all the documents that we were provided with by the various interested parties, all of the statements that they have provided both before the inquiry started, once the inquiry started, and their evidence in the inquiry if they were called. All of that is transcribed. Everything that we're relying on is there. There isn't anything outside of that that we are seeking to rely upon beyond what the law is. I mean, obviously, I don't need to put on the website the law as such. We are obviously bound by the law, and we will seek to ensure we stick within its parameters. I hope that answers your questions, Ramdas. We certainly are not taking any evidence from outside of that which has already been provided.
No, I didn't mean taking evidence from outside. I meant, utilizing anybody's services, any company, in terms of treating with the evidence and going through it, evaluating it, any, technical reports and such.
No, I mean, we have, I've been blessed with a very good legal team. They, in the shape of Mr. Maharaj, Mr. Bissessar, and Miss Maharaj, the three of them have been providing myself and Mr. Wilson with the kind of support that we have found it necessary to draw upon. Certainly when it comes to the law and assimilating the evidence. Administratively, we've been very well ably assisted by Ms. Sinanen and her staff. So we don't need anyone else. Ultimately, it's for me to draft the report and to share that draft in the first instance with Mr. Wilson, who has made his contributions, and we together end up with a report with which we are happy. It is our obligation simply to make sure that everybody else has an opportunity to respond to it before it's published, and for us to then take that into account. That's where we are.
Thank you.
There is a question in the group chat, from Sunil Lala from TTT News, who does not have his mic on. His question is, you mentioned both that you received letters from both Paria and Kenson for your recusal. If they were to submit for a hearing, as you said, would this further delay the Commission of Inquiry's report, and what timeline can such a hearing be held?
Right, well, I can answer that in two ways. First of all, no such request as I've said made as yet. If there is an application for me to recuse myself, and or Mr. Wilson to recuse himself, and certainly from counsel for Kenson, they made that pretty clear. If that's what they want to do, then I would have thought that the first place to come to was us, in which case we'll have a hearing over it. They can make such representations as they choose. And if we think there's merit in it, then of course I would have to recuse myself. But at the moment, that's not happened. If they're going elsewhere, that is to say, to the High Court to seek to have us prevented from publishing the report or providing a report, as I think one of them suggested, that it is our approach has been irretrievable, that is a matter for them. I can't and won't delay my task in preparing this report. I should say, as I said earlier, we have had responses now from everyone. It is not as if someone has said, look, I'm not responding to this because I think you're biased. I'm withdrawing from this process because you're being unfair to us. That's not what has been said. We have had responses from everyone. They've said I'm biased and unfair as well, but they have provided us with responses, and we will deal with those responses in what I hope is a fair fashion. That is to say, we'll take into account all of the submissions they've made, and that will be reflected in what will then become our draft report. That draft report will then summarize any criticisms that remain, if any do, with in a separate letter, which we will send to each of their lawyers and or themselves, so that they can respond to it. And it may be that on further analysis, they would wish to make further representations. And if they do, we'll take those into account. And it may result in them not being any criticism of them at all. On the other hand, it may change things completely, and We may be more critical. I don't know. I simply don't know. All I know is that we must provide them with every possible opportunity to deal with any criticisms that we might make of them. And that is what I'm intending to do. And I won't be deflected from that task, as I've made clear, I hope, right from the very outset of my involvement in this inquiry, by any applications being made or any attempt to try and delay proceedings. So I hope that answers your question. All right. Anyone else? Well, it appears not. I'm both pleased and surprised. All right, then. Well, look, thank you very much, everyone, for attending again. I reiterate my apology for the delay. I regard it as necessary, and I'm pleased to say that the President has provided me with that additional time to ensure that we have this report completed by November. So thank you very much indeed, and I will see you all again, I hope, sometime in the later part of November.
All right, folks, so that's the update. I mean, that's all for now. Just to summarize everything that has been stated so far, on the 28th of August, the chairman of the Commission of Inquiry asked for an extension. He received a reply from the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on the 30th of August, and the President agreed to extend the Commission of Inquiry to the 30th of November. The families of those divers who have died were very, very displeased that there's yet another extension, when initially the chairman indicated that the final report and submission will be ready by Easter of this year. It is now the end of that period, considerably going into November, and the families are very, very upset about that and have indicated that this particular extension was unwelcome. Going further, the chairman would have indicated that he received letters from lawyers representing Paria, Heritage, and Kenson, who have indicated that they have concerns that he has, and they are requesting that he recuse himself from the proceedings. The chairman has responded by indicating that he wholeheartedly rejects those accusations out of hand, and he would think that it would be behoven on these lawyers to present their case before the tribunal itself, and not outside of it, because that is the proper procedure. And if indeed there is any case for him to answer, then of course he and either the deputy commissioner would recuse themselves and the case would go forward. However, he said very categorically that he will not be deflected by any attempt to delay the proceedings. He doesn't expect there to be any further delay, because all of the information has been received, all of the documentation has been received, and he anticipates that everything will be done, hopefully, by the new deadline. He indicated that he, of course, was very ambitious initially with his initial timetable, but he just couldn't have imagined the amount of evidence and stakeholders involved in this particular case. And therefore, he was very much surprised and enlightened by that fact. And thus, this is yet another extension, with the hope that all parties will have enough time to represent themselves and to respond to any criticisms that the Commission of Inquiry has made on them. He has indicated that there has been initially an initial draft report done with their preliminary findings, And all of these things have been done, representations have been made, and they're waiting for those persons who have been critiqued to send in their replies. He have also indicated that some of the proceedings going forward will have to be private and not publicized, but to date, everything has been publicized and put on the internet for members of the public to review, right? But going forward, with some of the preliminary findings and inquiries, these things will be done in private, and then ultimately the final report will be done. And he is not going to be deflected in any way by any lawyers representing the different parties that tried to prevent and delay the proceedings. In the end, he made it very clear that one of the lawyers representing the trio, Paria, Heritage, and Kenson, said that they may go to the High Court to seek to prevent him from publishing this report for the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago to see. They want to prevent him from publishing that report to the public. And he said he will have none of it because the public has a right to know. So this is where we are at this present time. The Commission of Inquiry. The chairman is under pressure from Paria, Kenson, and Heritage lawyers who don't want him to publish that report to the public. And so he is doing what he can to ensure that he is not accused of bias in any way, and is giving enough time so as to ensure that all parties get fair representation going forward. So that basically is it, everyone. Thank you for listening, and you could go back to see what you've missed. Have a good evening, and that's your update on the Paria Fuel Trading Company tragedy that took the lives of those divers.